Released on Steam Early Access in December 2014 and officially in May 2015, Malebolgia is an indie survival horror game developed in Unity by, and I do apologise if I mispronounced the name, Jochen Mistian. The game is noted for its similarity to the Soul series in concept, and is inspired by classical works such as Dante Alighieri's Inferno, as well as the Ars Goetia portion of the Lesser Key of Solomon, which explores the ideas and rituals around demon summoning, as well as detailing the names and ranks of 72 demons and what they are capable of. The game takes place in the appropriately named Palace Malebolgia. You play the role of an aged, battle-weary soldier named Leopold who has discovered that things in the palace aren't exactly as they seem. Your goal is to guide Leopold through the palace, fighting the creatures lurking within and meeting some familiar faces along the way, all while trying to piece together what exactly is going on. Keeping Leopold company is his trusty halberd to fight the creatures and a torch to guide his way through the dark halls and corridors that he'll be traversing through. So let's charge on ahead and start with the good. One of the game's greatest strengths lies in exploration. There's a lot of it for you to do, and you never know what could be lurking behind the next door or corner. The dangers scale with progression too, so if you have to return to a certain area of the palace, the enemies there might be completely different from the ones you had fought earlier in the game when visiting that area. Awareness in your surroundings play a part, as you can easily overlook parts of the wall that you could break down, or rooms that have been previously blocked or locked being available to you after meeting certain criteria. Enemies and hazards are another thing to look out for, as some enemies like to hide and attack you as you're climbing up the stairs, masquerade themselves as statues, or even slide down from the curtains. Hazards mainly include some of the larger statues occasionally trying to grab Leopold and damaging him if they are successful. The survival horror aspect is certainly there, as there are no health pickups over the course of the game, and save points are far and few in between. Leopold can recover a portion of his health by lighting various candles around the palace using his torch, and the amount of life he has remaining is also represented by how strong the flame is on said torch, as well as a red bar at the top of the screen. Throughout the game, Leopold can come across corpses which can grant him additional protection in the form of a white bar above his health bar. This can sometimes come in handy against the bosses he'll be up against, or even against the monsters while he's exploring the palace. Throughout the game, Leopold comes across the Beast, and by fending him off, his health and attack goes up, which does come in handy as things get more rough down the track. The storytelling of the game has been done very well. Leopold's history is very vague, and the various NPCs he can talk to play a part in the story. As to what part, you'll discover as you progress throughout the game, but the vague story and the drive to find out just what's going on kept me playing far longer than I'd initially anticipated, and there were times where I told myself that I'd take a break at the next save point just to find something interesting in my surroundings, or with something an NPC had said. Another thing I liked is that the game also didn't try to funnel you into following a straight path to the next boss, at least for the most part, nor does it hold your hand and explain where you have to go next. However, with good things there's always going to be stuff that isn't good, and we're going to jump right into that with the bad. Firstly, I found the controls in the game to be a little stiff, particularly with backstepping. One of the bosses I fought in the game had to be fought in a narrow hallway, and I found that instead of moving backwards, Leopold would dodge to the side instead, allowing him to get hit. Hit detection could also use a little work, as I found myself getting hit and taking damage after an attack animation's finished, and I rush in to counterattack. Some enemies like the spiders can stun lock Leopold and continually jump on him repeatedly to kill him if you aren't careful. I also never found out the relevance of the flying creatures around the palace. They fly away when Leopold approaches, and while they can be locked onto, they cannot be attacked, nor do they attack Leopold. I suspect they're more or less there to add to the atmosphere. I think the game could have used a few puzzles to add to the challenge. While exploring is fun and all, it's been generally go here, kill this, go back to a locked door, see where that goes, find another locked door, and repeat. Throw in some puzzles to keep Leopold busy, maybe even have enemies attack him while he's solving it, will certainly add tension and challenge to the game. The setting of the game certainly has potential when it comes down to puzzles, but I guess the biggest puzzle would be the game's story, as it doesn't fill you in on all the details and requires you to use your imagination to fill in the gaps. Enemy AI I felt could also use a bit of work, especially with the bosses. Most of the bosses I had little to no trouble with beating, as I could simply employ a strategy of tack, sidestep, attack. One boss can even be cheesed by standing on the other side of a stone coffin. In all honesty, the spider boss was the only enemy to really give me grief given the hallway that we were fighting in. I ended up finding the AI of the normal enemies to be more deadly than the bosses at times, especially when dealing with them in greater numbers. But I think that's all I really wanted to cover here, so let's move on to the next part of the review. The Ugly, where I discuss graphics, visual presentation, and the game's score. The game employs a very minimalistic art style reminiscent of games in the 1990s, Alone in the Dark springs to mind, which I believe was executed perfectly. Leopold and the inhabitants of Palace Malebolgia aren't greatly detailed, but I think that adds to the charm of the game. The palace design, in my opinion, has been done incredibly well, with a large variety of different rooms and places to visit, decorated by eerie statues and paintings. Lighting effects are exceptionally good, as it lights up a small area around Leopold, but doesn't provide him a great advantage against what lurks in the darkness. The game does suffer from the odd bug or two, but the major one I had an issue with was when you start from your last save point, the game likes to freeze for upwards of 10 to 15 seconds before allowing me to continue. Aside from that, the other bugs that weren't spiders were somewhat amusing. In the sound department, there's good ambience which builds the atmosphere in exploring the palace. The piano piece you also hear the princess playing also hints at some foreshadowing, as the piece is a classical piece titled Pavane for a Dead Princess by French composer Maurice Ravel. Also confirming that the time era of the game is in the 20th century, as the piece was composed in 1899. Boss battle music is tense given the close range combat with each boss in the game, and complements the game very well. I think the choice of sounds and music for the games were suitable and added to the enjoyment. So let's sign off with my final thoughts on the game. Malebolgia is a very simple game which brings its point across very effectively. It's a very impressive piece of work given that the game was developed by one person with music being composed by another. And it's an excellent example of what a single person with a creative mind and a lot of dedication is capable of. While the game is reasonably short, as I was able to beat it during the evening, the atmosphere, ambience and simplistic gameplay was well worth the time spent. As I mentioned earlier, more challenging AI and maybe some puzzles thrown in would break some of the monotony and perhaps even make the game last a little bit longer. Story is a bit abstract, but the vague approach will allow you, as the player, to draw your own conclusions as to how things went down and what certain events and things in the palace personify or represent. And with that, it's time for my rating. I would give Malebolgia the 9th Circle of Hell out of 10. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next Infinite Backlog review.